a single slow breath sound. Inhale, exhale. The world outside is loud, rushing and insistent, but here, with us, the noise fades. You're walking into the quietest place on earth, a place where history isn't written in books, but etched deep into bark and stone. Tonight, we enter the ancient archive of the forest, a place that is waiting for you to fall asleep so it can begin to tell its secrets. Everything here is real, even the things that sound like whispers in the dark. It is a world of gentle, hypnotic rustle. The canopy above you is a roof of sleeping giants, but below that roof, the real life begins. Close your eyes and imagine the rich, damp smell of the soil and the old, cold air of the deepest shadows. The forest knows you are here, but it doesn't judge. It simply invites you to listen to its story. Let the facts of the deep woods lead your mind gently away from the busy day. We begin by looking up at the sky, which seems so far away, yet you are already surrounded by the oldest, most patient things alive. Tonight, we will count 100 facts about the forest, facts that are creepy because they are true. Let the silence of the trees replace the chatter of your thoughts. There is nothing to fear, only history to learn. Hidden just beneath the surface of the forest is time itself. It is not a garden, nor is it a playground. It is the world's oldest, quietest museum. Every single layer of soil beneath your feet holds a forgotten memory, a history that refuses to die, waiting only for a moment of quiet to be remembered. When a human city crumbles, it leaves ruins. But when the forest takes over, it leaves something far more complex, a living graveyard. The woods act as a giant sponge, slowly absorbing every tragedy, every secret and every structure that humans dared to leave behind. It is a slow, methodical process that happens far out of sight. The trees stand as witnesses, never speaking but always remembering. They are the true record keepers, their rings marking years of both sun and silence, growth and great sadness. This ancient, patient place is ready to reveal what it holds. For this hour, let the forest be the only thing that matters. We will move past the simple beauty of the daylight woods and enter the true, quiet heart of the perpetual darkness. It is here we find the facts that make the skin prickle, the truths that confirm the woods are not empty, but full of things we simply do not yet understand, held fast by the roots of time. The Wood Wide Web. Underground, the forest is not a collection of separate plants, but a massive connected brain. Trees of different species use a network of fungi known as mycelium to share food, water, and even chemical warnings. It is a silent, hidden intelligence, a wood wide web that allows the old, strong trees to feed the young, weaker ones, ensuring the collective survival of the entire community. When one tree is attacked by insects or disease, it sends a distress signal through this network, silently telling its neighbours to raise their own defences. These warnings travel slowly through the soil, moving below the surface, where we can never hear them. It is a communication system far older than our own telephones, and it makes every tree a listener and a silent guardian for the entire family of the woods. This ancient infrastructure means that when a single tree dies, its neighbours know. They sense the loss of connection, and may even try to keep its stump alive for years, feeding it slowly through the root grafts. The trees do not forget their fallen. Their silent memory of the deceased remains etched into the soil, creating a community bound not just by sun and water, but by shared history and quiet, deep attachment. The silent scream trees can produce and release chemicals when they are damaged, and scientists call this a kind of silent scream. When a caterpillar begins to chew on a leaf, the tree doesn't just suffer. It releases a specific smell into the air that attracts the caterpillar's natural enemy, like a parasitic wasp. This is a targeted call for help that we cannot smell or hear. When the leaf of a plant is broken off, The plant often releases a powerful chemical into the atmosphere to warn others. It is the smell of freshly cut grass, which we find pleasant, but to the grass, it is a desperate warning that parts of its body have been violently removed. This common scent, a familiar smell of summer, is actually a silent cry of distress that blankets the landscape. Even more unsettling is that trees can recognize the smell of saliva from specific animals. If a deer starts to eat a branch, the tree can tell it's a deer and not an insect, and it changes its defense strategy to produce a chemical that tastes bitter only to deer. The forest is constantly watching and classifying its threats, remembering the tiny differences in every living creature that passes by. The immortal fungi. The largest living thing on Earth is not a blue whale or a giant redwood tree, but a single massive network of fungus in Oregon, USA, called the Armillaria ostoii. This giant fungus is mostly hidden underground, stretching over 3 square miles and weighing more than 3 blue whales combined. It is a slow, patient and quiet life form whose vast body is hidden from our eyes. This fungus is known as the honey mushroom, which sounds harmless, but it is actually a devastating parasite that kills trees by slowly suffocating their roots. It is so successful because it has been doing this for thousands of years, living longer than nearly every other organism we know. Its immense body is constantly growing outward, silently consuming the roots of the trees above it, century after century. In the deep forest, the only visible sign of this monster are small clusters of mushrooms that appear on the surface for a few days before sinking back into the earth. It is a silent killer, working in the deepest dark. The trees above it are not standing on solid ground. They are standing on the slow, vast, creeping body of an organism that is patiently waiting for them all to die so it can spread even further. The trees that eat stone. When you see a large tree growing around a stone wall or a metal fence, you're witnessing an extremely slow, patient act of consumption. Tree roots are not only powerful enough to lift concrete, but they also release weak acids that slowly dissolve the minerals in stone. They are not merely growing next to the stone, they are quietly, methodically and slowly eating it. Imagine the immense quiet power needed to wrap around a solid object and slowly incorporate it into the tree's living body. This process can take centuries, with the metal or stone becoming a permanent, unsettling guest inside the tree's wood. When these trees are eventually cut down, pieces of the absorbed, swallowed material are often found deep inside the trunk, proving the tree's incredible patient strength. This act of consumption makes the forest a place where the barrier between nature and human-made objects blurs and vanishes. A tree that has swallowed a bicycle or a fence post is a living archive, holding a piece of human history trapped forever within its flesh. It reminds us that no matter what we build, the forest will eventually find a way to quietly claim and digest it into its own silent story. The tree's blood. When a tree is cut or damaged, it does not bleed in the way a human does, but it does release a thick, sticky fluid called resin or sap, which acts as its own protective defense. This resin is often dark, almost black, and it hardens quickly, sealing the wound and trapping any invading insects or fungi inside its amber-like tomb. It is the tree's ancient dark blood, used to seal away its past injuries. If you look closely at the bark of an old pine or spruce, you can see these hardened, glossy patches. They are the visible scars of the tree's history, showing where a limb was lost, an animal clawed it, or a severe storm broke its skin. These resinous patches are the proof that the tree has struggled and survived, turning its trauma into a protective shield. Over millions of years, this resin can harden into the gemstone we call amber. Within this fossilized tree blood, ancient insects, leaves, and sometimes even small creatures are perfectly preserved in a state of eternal waiting. This means that when you hold a piece of amber, you are holding the exact final moment of life trapped in the hardened, million-year-old trauma of a tree. the connected family. When two trees of the same species grow very close to each other, their roots often physically meet and fuse together in a process called root grafting. This is not just a simple touch, it's a permanent biological merger, and from that point on, the two trees share a single circulatory system, pumping water and nutrients through both bodies. They become one single, silent organism. This shared life means that if one tree is poisoned or dies, the other can be directly affected, showing the deep risk of their connection. Even more eerily, if a forest is logged and only a few stumps are left behind, those stumps can sometimes be kept alive for decades by their fully connected neighbours. The living trees refuse to let their family completely die, a quiet testament to their bond. Some scientists believe this deep root merging is a way for the trees to ensure the survival of their specific genes, protecting the family even if one member falls to disease or logging. When you look at a cluster of trees, you're not seeing individuals, you're seeing a connected family, physically bound by a dark, hidden network of shared life and shared secrets deep below the surface of the soil. The ghostly white fungus. The ghost pipe is a strange, unsettling plant found in the darkest parts of the forest. It is pure white, sometimes tinged with pink, and it does not use sunlight to create its food. It is entirely parasitic, stealing its energy from the fungi that are connected to the roots of nearby trees. It thrives only in the permanent shadow, looking like a cluster of tiny pale bones. Because it lacks chlorophyll, the green substance that most plants use, the ghost pipe never appears green. It looks like a living fragile fungus, but it is actually a flower that has given up the sun entirely for a life of silent subterranean theft. When it's picked, it quickly turns black, symbolizing its inability to exist for long once removed from its dark, connected world. The fact that it is a flower that chooses to live in this strange, dependent way, hidden in the perpetual shadow, makes it feel utterly alien. It is a reminder that the deep forest has its own rules, and the most successful life forms are often those that choose the path of least resistance and greatest darkness, finding ways to live that are unseen and unsettling to us. The tree's oldest secret, dendrochronology, is the science of dating events by studying the annual growth rings of trees. This silent, patient record-keeping allows scientists to pinpoint not just the year a tree was cut, but specific events that happened hundreds of years ago, like a wildfire, a massive volcanic eruption, or even a drought. The tree rings are a library of history written in wood. A very wide ring tells of a good, sunny year with plenty of water, while a thin, dark ring records a year of struggle, cold, or serious damage. Even the subtle changes in the chemistry of the wood can tell scientists about ancient atmospheric conditions, air pollution, or nuclear fallout. The tree holds these secrets silently, carrying the memory of the Earth's atmosphere within its core. When a scientist finds an ancient, preserved log, they can cross-reference its rings with those of still-living trees, extending the record of Earth's climate and history back thousands of years. This means that the trees we walk past every day hold detailed memories of events that happened long before human history was ever recorded on paper. They are the world's most enduring, quiet witnesses. The soil's deepest layer. The very top layer of forest soil is the thinnest layer of all, often no thicker than a few inches. But it is the most chaotic and most important. This is where all the recently fallen leaves, dead insects, and surface-level tragedies begin their slow, unseen transformation. It is the active, hungry mouth of the forest, constantly taking things in and breaking them down. Below that thin top layer is the dark, rich layer of humus, the deepest, most ancient part of the topsoil. This material is made of things that have been slowly broken down over centuries. It is the final resting place for countless generations of plants, animals, and history. The humus is the forest's memory bank, a thick, quiet blanket of everything that has ever lived and died in that space. The soil itself is a terrifyingly busy place, a hidden city teeming with billions of microscopic life forms, fungi and worms, all working in the deepest dark. It is a constantly moving, living entity. The moment anything falls to the forest floor, a leaf, a branch, or something much larger, it is immediately claimed and patiently absorbed into this ancient, silent, consuming earth. The secret language of roots do not just grow straight down in search of water. They actively sense and navigate around obstacles, almost like a creature avoiding walls in a maze. They can sense chemical signals left by other roots, and they can even tell the difference between their own roots and those of a foreign tree, often choosing to move away from strangers. In some environments, when a root finds an extremely valuable, concentrated patch of nutrients or water, it releases a chemical signal that tells other roots in the area to come and join the feast. They don't hoard the find. They share the good news, showing a strange sense of quiet, subterranean cooperation we rarely see above ground. They call their family to the table. A single oak tree can have a root system that mirrors the size of its branches, spreading hundreds of feet wide. If you could see the roots of the whole forest at once, you would not see empty space, but a massive, living, tangled net, holding the entire landscape in a tight, dark, silent embrace. It is a world of conscious, patient motion in the deep earth. Fungi that command insects. There is a fungus called Ophiocordyceps that has earned the unsettling nickname zombie ant fungus. Its spores infect the brain of specific insects, usually ants, and then slowly take control of the ant's body and mind. It is a perfect, tiny biological puppet master, controlling the ant's final, desperate actions. The fungus doesn't just kill the ant, it forces the ant to leave the safety of its colony and climb to a specific, high point on a blade of grass or a fern. Once it reaches the perfect spot, a place where the humidity and temperature are exactly right, the ant locks its jaws onto the plant and dies, suspended high above the ground in a final, involuntary grip. Once the ant is dead, the fungus grows a long, dark stalk out of the ant's head, which then releases new spores to drift down and infect the ants walking on the ground below. The entire process is a cold, calculated, fungal operation, turning a living creature into a precise temporary delivery system for its own propagation. The quiet spore cloud fungi release billions of microscopic spores into the air every single day. These spores are lighter than dust, and they travel on the smallest air currents, blanketing the entire world. When you walk through the forest, you're constantly inhaling, touching, and being covered by this invisible, silent dust from the decay machine. Some studies suggest that up to 25% of the air's living particles are fungal spores. They are everywhere, in the air we breathe, on the glass of our windows, and settled silently on our skin. They are the unseen architects of decay, waiting patiently for the moment life ends, so they can begin their work of breaking down and recycling the materials of the world. This means that the forest's oldest job, recycling and decomposition, is constantly floating around you, waiting for an opportunity. Every log that breaks down, every dead animal that disappears into the soil, contributes to this massive, silent cloud of spores, an airborne army ready to colonize the next patch of decay. The air itself is alive with this quiet, patient force. The black rot many fungi and molds have specific, terrifying purposes. One of the most unsettling is the black rot, a fungus that attacks apples and other fruits while they are still on the branch. It slowly shrivels the fruit until it is completely black and mummified, hanging there like a tiny, perfectly preserved corpse long after the healthy fruit has been eaten or fallen away. The mummified fruit, however, is not truly dead. It is a permanent, silent factory for the fungus, constantly producing and releasing new spores into the surrounding area. The rot uses the fruit structure to ensure its own survival and spread. It is an enduring, dark monument to its own perfect method of patient, quiet destruction, hanging eerily from the living tree. When the weather turns cold, the black mummy drops to the ground and rests beneath the soil, waiting for the spring. When the temperature rises, it sends up tiny black cup-shaped growths that begin the cycle all over again, attacking the new fruit. The black rot is a symbol of the decay machine's patience, its ability to wait, and its certainty that all things will eventually be broken down. The deep slime moulds are not fungi, animals, or plants. They are single-celled organisms that act together like a giant pulsing moving brain when they need to hunt for food. They can move slowly across the forest floor, oozing over leaves and logs, and they can even solve mazes in laboratory conditions to find their food source. When food is plentiful, they live separately, but when it becomes scarce, they combine into a massive shimmering body called a plasmodium. This collective unit can be brightly coloured, yellow, red, or orange, and it flows slowly across the ground. It is a silent, pulsing entity that demonstrates a strange, quiet intelligence without a single brain or nervous system. Some researchers have studied how slime moulds grow and found that their pathways and networks often mimic the efficiency of city road maps, subway systems, and even the neural pathways in our own brains. This single-celled entity creates incredibly complex organised structures, reminding us that life's most unsettling forms of intelligence are often the simplest, quietest, and most hidden. The silent ticks. Ticks are small, ancient creatures that have perfected the art of silent, patient ambush. They don't jump or fly. They simply climb to the tip of a blade of grass or a low branch and wait, sometimes for months, for an animal or a human to walk by and brush against them. This waiting posture is called questing. Ticks are drawn by the heat and carbon dioxide that warm-blooded creatures emit, and they can wait for hours, perfectly still, until they sense the precise moment to latch on. They carry a number of frightening diseases that have existed in the forest for thousands of years, transferring ancient bacteria from one creature to the next, like tiny, quiet agents of history. Because their bite is painless, they often go unnoticed for days, quietly feeding and exchanging the forest's ancient, unseen poisons. The fact that such a small, slow creature can be so effective in its ambush, an invisible threat waiting in the most common places, is a silent reminder that the forest's greatest dangers are often the ones you cannot see or hear moving towards you. The invisible thread. Spider silk is one of the strongest materials in the natural world, stronger than steel when compared by weight, and it is a key architectural component in the silent woods. Spiders use their silk to build invisible nets across paths and branches, waiting for the smallest touch to signal a victim. The forest is full of these hidden sticky traps. Some spiders use a technique called ballooning. They release a long strand of silk into the wind and allow the static electricity of the atmosphere to lift them off the ground, sometimes carrying them for hundreds of miles. They are silent, tiny travellers descending from the sky into random locations, ready to restart their hunt wherever they land. When you walk through the woods and feel a sticky thread catch on your face, you're touching the quiet infrastructure of a predator's home, a net built with patience and perfect engineering. It is an unseen, constant presence, a reminder that the canopy above and the paths below are strung with thousands of invisible lines all connected to a patient hunter. The plant that hates water. In the rainforests, there is a tree called the sandbox tree, and it is one of the most volatile and dangerous plants in the world. Its dark bark is covered in thousands of sharp black spikes, giving it a menacing appearance. More unsettlingly, its sap is highly poisonous, causing painful burns and blistering on human skin. But the tree's most creepy defense is its fruit. The small pumpkin-shaped seed pods, when dried, act like small, time-delayed bombs. They build up immense pressure, and when fully dried by the sun, they explode with a loud cracking sound, launching their seeds outward at speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. These seeds can travel up to 60 feet away, scattering shrapnel-like debris over a wide area. This terrifying defense mechanism gives the sandbox tree the nickname Dynamite Tree. It is a creature that defends its space not with quiet patience, but with sudden, violent chaos, making the ground beneath its canopy an active, unseen danger zone. The decay of scent. The decomposition of organic matter, whether it is a fallen log or a dead animal, is a process that involves a release of volatile chemicals that we perceive as the heavy, dark scent of the deep forest. Many of these chemicals are the exact same ones found in human perfume and food flavouring. For example, the deep, earthy smell of old-growth forest floor is often caused by geosmin, a chemical that is responsible for the distinct scent of rain hitting dry earth. Vanillin, the main component in vanilla flavour, is produced by certain organisms as they break down wood. The sweet, dark smells we love are often the very smells of things rotting slowly. This means that the deepest, most complex perfumes of the forest, the notes of earth, spice, and deep richness, are literally the scent of perfect, slow decay. The woods are constantly smelling like the ingredients of life ending and new life beginning. When you breathe that dark air deeply, you're smelling the entire ancient cycle of consumption and transformation. The seed that waits. Many seeds in the forest are covered in an incredibly hard, protective coating that prevents them from immediately germinating. They often need to be swallowed by an animal and pass through its digestive tract, or even go through a forest fire before their hard shell is broken and they can begin to grow. Some seeds are known to lie dormant in the forest floor for hundreds of years, patiently waiting for the exact perfect conditions to wake up. These ancient seeds are like tiny biological time capsules, holding the perfect genetic map of trees that lived and died centuries ago. They are a library of unsprouted life, waiting silently in the dark. When a section of old-growth forest is cleared, these centuries-old seeds, which are not meant for the sun, finally get the light they need and often sprout, bringing back species of plants that haven't been seen in the area for generations. They are patient, silent witnesses to change, ready to restore the long-forgotten history of the forest floor when their moment finally arrives. The leaf that eats flesh. The forest contains many carnivorous plants, but the most unsettling is the sundew. Unlike the fast-snapping Venus flytrap, the sundew is a slow, quiet killer. Its leaves are covered in hundreds of tiny hair-like tentacles, each tipped with a drop of glistening, clear, sticky fluid. It looks beautiful, almost covered in morning dew. The sticky drops are not dew, but a powerful, sweet-smelling glue that attracts and traps small insects. Once an insect lands, the tiny tentacles slowly, patiently curl inward, wrapping the victim tightly until it suffocates. The digestive enzymes in the glue then slowly break down the soft tissue of the insect's body over several hours. The plant's slow, beautiful patience is what makes it so creepy. It is a flower that uses deceptive beauty to lure its victim to a gentle, quiet death, holding them in a long, glistening embrace before dissolving them. It reminds us that in the forest, even the most delicate, fragile-looking things can be ruthless, methodical killers. The impossible vision. Nocturnal creatures in the forest see the world in ways we cannot imagine. Many have an extra layer behind their retina called the tapetum lucidum, a reflective mirror. When light enters their eye, it hits this layer, bounces back through the retina, and gives them a second chance to catch the light. This layer is what makes an animal's eyes glow in the dark when a flashlight or car headlights hit them. It is a frightening and beautiful biological adaptation that means the smallest bit of moonlight, or even the reflection of starlight, is enough for them to see in near total darkness. They are constantly watching the pitch black with perfect clarity. While we stumble and are blinded by the darkness, the owls, raccoons, and predators of the night move with silent certainty, their eyes acting like powerful, built-in night vision scopes. When you're standing in the deepest shadow of the woods, remember that to them, You are perfectly, clearly visible in a world of deep, focused light. The silent wing owls are the perfect silent assassins of the forest, and their quiet flight is due to a specific design in their feathers that we cannot replicate. The front edge of their wing has a flexible, comb-like structure that breaks up the turbulence of the air as they fly. This makes the sound waves scatter and vanish into the night. The soft, velvety surface of their flight feathers then absorbs any remaining sound, allowing the owl to fly directly over prey without making a single noise. The largest birds, the great horned owls and barred owls, can fly just a few feet above a person's head, and the motion is often felt before it is ever heard. This means that a predator the size of a cat or small dog can pass through the air with the perfect silence of a ghost. The only sounds in the deep woods are the sounds made by creatures that are not hunting. If the night is absolutely silent, it only means the most efficient, terrifying things are on the move. The deep earth listener. Many forest animals use the ground itself as a massive sensitive eardrum. Deer, rabbits, and other prey animals can stamp their feet slightly to send tiny vibrations into the earth, and then they listen with their legs and ears close to the ground to hear the echoes of movement hundreds of feet away. These vibrations can reveal the footsteps of a predator, the movement of underground insects, or the rush of water. By listening to the ground, they can see the world with their feet in a way that we cannot. The entire floor of the forest is a constantly vibrating, silent map of activity for the creatures who know how to read it. If you watch a deer in the woods, it will often freeze and lift one hoof slightly, not because it is about to run, but because it is listening intently to the earth's quiet language. This means that a running predator's footsteps are not just sound in the air, but a tremor that travels through the earth, giving a warning that is impossible to hide from. The shadow hunter. The largest land predators of the forest, such as bears and cougars, rely on their immense patience and the dense canopy cover to hunt. A cougar can lie perfectly still on a high dark branch for hours, blending perfectly with the bark and leaves, waiting for prey to pass directly beneath it. Their coat colours are designed to mimic the shadows and light patterns of the forest floor, making them virtually invisible unless they move. They use the forest's natural camouflage to become a silent extension of the trees themselves. When a predator disappears in the woods, it truly vanishes, becoming a temporary living part of the landscape. This means that every dark, thick shadow in the woods could potentially hold a creature watching you with cold, focused concentration. The greatest danger is not the noisy snapping of a twig, but the perfect, absolute silence of something that has decided to wait for you to make the final, fatal mistake of walking beneath its quiet perch. The hidden cache. Many forest animals, especially foxes and rodents, create multiple hidden caches or storage places for their food. They dig several small holes deep beneath the leaves and roots and hide acorns, nuts, or even the remains of a kill, spreading their resources around in a silent, forgotten bank of provisions. Over time, these caches are often abandoned or simply forgotten. The food that remains is left deep in the soil, slowly decaying, or sometimes it is simply left to sprout. These hidden reserves mean that the forest floor is constantly full of secret, buried treasures that only the ancient creatures know about, or perhaps nobody knows about at all. This means that deep in the woods, there are thousands of tiny, lost stockpiles of food, a hidden, silent infrastructure of buried resources. The ground is a complex, scattered map of forgotten wealth, all placed there by creatures working in the dark and all waiting to be discovered by something hungry, or simply to turn into a forgotten plant. The venomous skin. Some of the most brightly coloured creatures in the rainforest, like the poison dart frogs, carry a terrifying defence right on their skin. The bright colour is a warning sign that the animal is highly toxic, and its skin secretes a powerful poison that can kill a human or a large animal with just a small touch. The poison, however, does not come from the frog itself, but from the insects and mites that the frog eats. The frog's body collects the toxins from its prey and stores them in special glands in its skin. It is an act of chemical recycling, turning the forest's tiny dangers into a massive, concentrated threat. The unsettling thing is that the frogs themselves are immune to their own poison. They hop around, completely harmless to themselves, carrying enough concentrated danger on their backs to kill 20 creatures. Their vibrant, beautiful appearance is the forest's most honest and most lethal warning sign. Do not touch the things that glow in the dark. The perfect disguise. Many insects, such as the walking stick and the leaf insect, are masters of camouflage, but their disguise goes beyond just looking like a piece of the forest. When these insects move, they sway and rock very slowly, even when there is no wind, perfectly mimicking the slight random movement of a branch or a falling leaf. This unsettling movement is designed to trick the eyes of predators who are trained to look for fast, direct motion. The insect moves just slowly and randomly enough to be dismissed as a piece of the dead forest. It is a terrifying level of patience and control, turning its living body into a perfect, quiet representation of decay and stillness. Some leaf insects even have fake bite marks or mold spots on their bodies to make their disguise even more convincing, suggesting that the easiest way to hide in the forest is to pretend you're already dead or damaged. When you see something in the woods that looks like a branch moving slightly, it might just be the quiet work of a tiny, brilliant actor. The flashlight moth. In some temperate forests, there is a moth that uses a shocking and unsettling defense mechanism. When threatened, this moth, which is otherwise dark and camouflaged, instantly flashes 2 large, brightly coloured eye spots on its wings. These spots look exactly like the glowing, enormous eyes of a much larger predator. This sudden flash of colour and the appearance of 2 giant eyes is often enough to startle a bird or a small mammal, giving the moth a fraction of a second to escape into the darkness. It is a moment of pure, blinding fear created by a tiny creature. It is the perfect theatrical use of illusion to avoid a terrible, quick death. The moth has turned its own body into a silent, temporary ghost. It carries the mask of a monster on its wings, ready to conjure an image of pure terror in the mind of anything that tries to eat it. This is a quiet reminder that in the woods, fear is often a powerful, necessary tool for survival, used by the smallest inhabitants. The earth's constant rumble. The forest floor is not a silent place, even when no wind blows. Beneath our ability to hear, the earth is constantly vibrating with infrasound. Low-frequency rumbles caused by everything from distant earthquakes and storms to the silent movement of massive trees swaying in a high breeze. It is a continuous, deep heartbeat of the planet. Many large animals, such as elephants and large cats, can perceive this infrasound with specialized organs. This allows them to sense weather changes, distant waterfalls, and the movements of other animals miles away. They can feel the world vibrating in their bodies, listening to the deep, complex song of the earth that is silent to human ears. This deep rumble can also cause unsettling effects in humans, sometimes creating feelings of intense unease, anxiety, or even the feeling of being watched, even when nothing is visibly there. The ancient low-frequency sound of the Earth's natural motion is enough to trick our minds, proving that the deeper sounds of the forest can be the most frightening. The predator's patience. A true hunter in the forest never rushes, but waits. An alligator or crocodile, which often lives near the edges of swamps and forested rivers, can hold its breath and remain perfectly motionless underwater for hours, becoming just another dark log in the water. This incredible patience is the key to its success. When it finally does move, it is with a sudden, silent burst of speed and power, proving that the most efficient killers are those that can become part of the environment itself, patiently waiting for the victim to forget the danger. The long stillness is the most terrifying part of the hunt, a deep, silent commitment to the moment of attack. The unsettling truth is that the forest teaches patience better than anything else. It teaches the predator to disappear into the shadow, to move without a sound, and to wait for the perfect moment. When the woods are truly silent, it is often not because they are empty, but because the things that live there have perfected the quiet art of the ambush. The swallowed railroad. Deep in the woods of many old countries, you can still find the decaying remains of forgotten railroad tracks. These short lines were often built 100 years ago to haul timber out of the most remote valleys, and they were abandoned when the trees ran out, or the demand stopped. The steel rails are often rusted to a deep dark red, and the wooden ties have rotted away entirely, but the tracks themselves remain, sunken deep into the earth. Trees, growing from seeds dropped between the rails, have slowly wrapped their trunks around the metal, swallowing the rails whole in a silent, patient process of consumption. These swallowed tracks are a creepy reminder that the forest's memory is permanent. It accepts our industrial past and slowly incorporates it into its own living body, turning a noisy railroad into a quiet, permanent scar on the landscape. The iron rails, which once carried immense weight, are now gently held by the trees themselves. The tree graveyards. In forests that have experienced massive, fast-moving fires, you can find massive patches of trees that are still standing, but completely dead. They are bleached bone-white by the sun, stripped of all bark and leaves, looking like a silent, ancient graveyard of towering ghosts in the sunlight. These dead trees, called snags, are a vital part of the forest ecosystem, providing shelter for insects and birds, but their appearance is deeply unsettling. They stand perfectly still for decades, long after the living forest has begun to reclaim the surrounding land, a constant, pale reminder of a violent tragedy. As they slowly decay, these ghost trees occasionally lose massive branches or even fall completely in a sudden crashing sound that breaks the silence. They are monuments to destruction, reminding us that even in the midst of renewal, the forest holds on to the stark, silent memory of its own past catastrophes. The stone foundations. When settlers or small mining companies abandoned their camps deep in the woods, the forest quickly swallowed the wooden cabins, but the stone foundations and chimneys remain. They are often found miles from any path, looking like the crumbling bones of a structure that existed in a time before anyone can remember. These simple stone squares and chimneys are all that is left of someone's entire life. A home, a fireplace, a place where people worked and slept, all reduced to a quiet, forgotten outline in the moss. They become accidental gardens, with ferns and small saplings growing right out of the ancient mortar, slowly breaking the stones apart. Finding one of these remote foundations is like uncovering a small, silent grave marker for a lost community. It reminds you that the woods are full of these small, forgotten histories, places where human hope once lived and then simply vanished, leaving only the coldest, heaviest stones as a quiet, permanent record of their presence. The dark mine shafts. Old mining claims often left behind deep, open mine shafts that are now completely hidden by the surrounding forest growth. These dark holes descend straight down into the earth, sometimes hundreds of feet, and they are nearly impossible to see until you are standing right on the edge of the overgrown entrance. These shafts are silent, deep graves, often filled with water at the bottom, and they hold the cold, still air of the deep earth. They are a terrifying hazard, a sudden, sheer drop into the forgotten industry of the past. The air that rises from them is often colder and thicker than the surrounding forest air, carrying the deep mineral smell of stone. The presence of these hidden holes means that the ground you walk on may not be solid at all. The earth is secretly pockmarked with holes and tunnels, all dug by humans and then abandoned to the quiet decay of time. It is a chilling thought that the solid ground beneath your feet could suddenly drop into a dark, forgotten history. The accidental dams. When beaver populations are left alone in the forest, they can build massive, complex dam systems that completely reshape the landscape, sometimes flooding acres of land to create massive ponds. These ponds drown the trees in the area, creating silent, shallow new lakes filled with the white, skeletal remains of drowned forests. The flooded area becomes a silent, unsettling landscape of dead, standing timber, white, smooth trees sticking straight up out of the dark water. The water itself is often dark and still, reflecting the dead trees like an eerie mirror. It is a place where the work of a single species has created a massive, quiet graveyard of wood. Eventually the beavers move on, and their complex dams slowly begin to fail, draining the pond and revealing the old forest floor, now buried under thick mud and the strange detritus of the drowned lake. The forest is a place of constant, silent change, where the smallest creatures can create the most massive and temporary graveyards. The forgotten wells. In old settlement areas, you can sometimes find abandoned stone or brick wells. These wells were dug deep into the earth to find water, and now they are often just a small round hole in the ground, covered with rotted wooden planks or overgrown with moss, making them nearly invisible. A well is a direct vertical line from the surface down into the deep, dark earth, often holding the cold, still water of the aquifer. Because they were once a source of life, they often became places where people disposed of things they wanted to forget: trash, tools, or even darker secrets. Finding an old well is unsettling because it represents a deep, silent cut into the earth's surface, a bottomless memory of a forgotten community. The sound of a dropped stone falling down the brick sides is the only sound that can break the silence, a final splash in the deep, cold water that holds everything that was once thrown away. The ancient forest floor. The floor of the forest is not flat, but often covered in low, gentle mounds and pits. These features are the quiet evidence of pit and mound topography, created when a massive old tree falls, pulling its entire root system out of the ground. This leaves a deep pit where the roots were, and a high mound of earth where the roots settled. These gentle ups and downs are a constant, silent reminder that the largest trees are not permanent. When a giant falls, it completely changes the landscape for hundreds of years. The pit collects water and becomes a temporary pond, and the mound provides a high, dry nursery for a new generation of seedlings to grow. This means that the surface of the woods is a constantly changing, quiet graveyard, full of the silent outlines of past destruction. You're constantly walking over the deep pits and high graves of trees that fell centuries ago. A landscape defined by the slow, chaotic process of life and death on a massive scale. The whispering tree. Sometimes, deep in the canopy, a tree will die from disease or lightning, but it remains standing perfectly straight and tall for many years, held up by the surrounding living trees. Because it is dead, its wood is perfectly dry and hollow, turning its structure into an accidental giant wind instrument. When the wind passes through the tiny holes and cracks in its dry bark and hollow core, the tree lets out a low, mournful and unsettling sound, a long, quiet groan, or a deep, hollow whistle that seems to come from nowhere. It is the sound of the dead forest speaking on the wind. This whispering tree is a creepy presence in the woods, breaking the silence with the deep, strange sound of its own decay. It is a reminder that even after death, the largest things in the forest refuse to remain silent, using their hollow bodies to create a quiet, haunting music on the night air. The forest's own weather forests create their own microclimates. The dense canopy acts like a giant umbrella, blocking the sun and trapping moisture. On a hot summer day, the air temperature inside the deep woods can be 10 to 20 degrees cooler than the open field nearby, creating a pocket of perpetual cool, damp air. At night, this microclimate often creates thick, slow-moving fog that clings low to the ground and doesn't lift until hours after the sun has risen. This fog is a quiet, natural phenomenon, but it makes the woods seem even more mysterious, obscuring the paths and making the familiar shapes of the trees disappear into the white gloom. The forest's self-made weather ensures that conditions for decay and hidden life are always optimal. It is a living, breathing machine that controls the light, temperature and moisture, making the deep woods a place that is perpetually damp, dark, and perfectly suited for things that do not want to be seen or disturbed by the sun. The perfect circle. The forest contains many unexplained phenomena, and one of the most famous is the sudden appearance of fairy circles, or perfect rings of dead grass or fungi in the middle of a healthy lawn or field. These circles grow outward in a perfect, slow ring, sometimes reaching over 30 feet in diameter. The cause is often a single fungus spore that lands in the grass and begins to grow outward at an even, precise rate. The growing edge of the fungus slowly kills the grass as it moves, creating the perfectly circular pattern. The oldest parts of the fungus die in the centre, but the active, living edge continues to expand. These perfectly drawn rings, which often appear overnight, have been linked to folklore about fairies and ancient rituals because their exact shape seems unnatural and perfectly intentional. They are a quiet, unsettling demonstration of how one tiny, unseen organism can spread its perfect, methodical destruction across a wide area. The Iron Harvest. The battlefields of the world wars were often fought in dense forests, and decades later, the ground still holds an iron harvest, a massive amount of unexploded ordnance, shrapnel and hidden weapons. Farmers and forestry workers still find these objects almost daily in parts of Europe. These old rusted bombs, shells and grenades have been lying dormant for a century, slowly being incorporated into the soil and roots of the forest. They are a constant, invisible danger, waiting to be disturbed by a plough, a shovel, or the growth of a massive tree root that finally stresses the rusted metal casing enough to make it unstable. The forest is a silent, sprawling minefield that holds the metal memories of human violence. It absorbs the tragedy and then patiently, slowly holds the danger in place. A terrifying reminder that the consequences of war do not end when the fighting stops, but continue silently beneath the canopy for generations. The trench scars. In some historical battlegrounds, the complex network of trenches and defensive positions dug into the ground is still visible nearly 100 years later. Although they are mostly filled in with leaves and decay, the land remains uneven, holding the subtle, gentle outline of the human chaos that once took place there. These trenches and foxholes, once filled with mud, fear and human struggle, are now part of the forest floor. They have become accidental water channels, collecting rain and creating small temporary habitats for different plants and animals. The violent history of the area has been absorbed into the quiet rhythm of the ecosystem. Walking over this uneven ground is like walking over the healed, gentle scars of an ancient giant. It is a quiet, permanent record of suffering, a reminder that the land remembers the details of violence long after the participants are gone. The silent mounds and dips are the forest's final, permanent memorial to the war. The witness tree. In very old historical sites, especially battlefields, sometimes one single, very old tree is designated as a witness tree. This tree was alive and fully grown during the historical event, the battle, the signing of a treaty, or the founding of a settlement, and saw everything with its silent, slow patience. The tree's core, its heartwood, holds the perfect, precise ring record of that exact time, including any shrapnel that hit its bark or any damage caused by fire or violence. It is a living, silent monument, the only true, non-human witness to the chaos and the quiet moments of the past. Standing next to one of these trees is unsettling, because it forces you to acknowledge that something so simple and quiet saw everything that happened in the human world centuries ago. It is a living, breathing archive of history that can never be edited or forgotten, patiently waiting for the wind to tell its quiet story. Agent Orange, a chemical defoliant used during the Vietnam War, was meant to strip the leaves from the forest to expose troops. Although the war ended decades ago, the chemical's deadly component, dioxin, remains locked in the deep soil and sediment of the forests and rivers. This chemical is often referred to as a ghost chemical because it is invisible, has no smell, and is extremely persistent. It remains trapped in the soil, slowly working its way up the food chain, affecting the health of the land, the animals, and the people who live near these areas even today. The forest that was once stripped bare has mostly regrown, but the soil itself holds the permanent invisible scar of the chemical. The quiet memory of the war is not in the destroyed trees, but in the deep, silent contamination of the earth, proving that some scars left on the land may never truly heal. The military debris beyond bombs and trenches, the forest floor in old military training areas is full of abandoned equipment, rusty canteens, helmets, spent ammunition casings, and even old boots and clothing. These objects are slowly consumed by the decay of the forest. The steel and leather objects are slowly digested by the chemical processes of the soil and the constant growth of the roots and moss. A helmet may become a temporary home for a family of mice, and a canteen may fill with water and become a tiny cold pool for insects. These forgotten objects are a quiet, permanent record of human presence and haste. They lay there, slowly turning back into the earth they came from, a reminder that no matter what tools or uniforms we bring into the woods, the forest will eventually reclaim and absorb it all into its silent, ongoing story of decay. The Chernobyl Forest. The forest surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear reactor accident in 1986 is perhaps the most unsettling human-caused graveyard on Earth. The radiation killed off the pine trees closest to the plant, turning them a deep, ominous red colour, earning the area the name the Red Forest. These dead trees were quickly bulldozed and buried under thick layers of sand and earth, but the radiation remains trapped in the deepest parts of the soil and the water. The new forest that has grown up around it is eerily healthy-looking, but it is still fundamentally contaminated, a quiet, invisible danger. Scientists have found that the fungi and insects in the area seem to be adapting and even thriving in the radiation, consuming the decay and spreading the contaminants. It is a terrifying example of the forest adapting to a deep, invisible wound, turning the quiet zone into a strange, new, and permanently dangerous ecosystem. The moss on the monument. In many old cemeteries that are completely surrounded by forest, the slow, patient growth of moss and lichen begins to obscure the names and dates on the tombstones. The forest decay machine is slowly working to erase the final human record. The moss is not just growing on the stone, it is slowly breaking it down with tiny acids, making the stone more porous and allowing water to enter. This is a quiet, natural process of erosion that will, over centuries, completely eliminate the carved words, returning the polished stones back to their natural blank state. This means that the forest is the final historian, deciding what memories will survive and what will be silently consumed. The names of the dead, once so important, are slowly being covered by a soft green blanket of forgetting, turning the monuments back into simple, quiet stones. The human-shaped depression. The forest is very good at breaking down human bodies, but sometimes the deepest depression where a body rested can remain visible for decades, especially in areas with clay or compact soil. The depression itself becomes a quiet, temporary microhabitat. The soil chemistry changes drastically where a body decomposes, often making the area more fertile and acidic. Plants and fungi that thrive in this specific changed soil will grow there more intensely than anywhere else, creating an unnatural, darker patch of growth in the shape of a silent, prone figure. This small, dark patch of earth is a subtle but permanent scar on the landscape, a quiet, visible outline of a person who returned to the earth. It is a ghostly, natural marker, proving that even after the flesh is gone, the final resting place is preserved in the soil's patient, permanent memory. The forest's own acid tannins are natural chemicals released by the decaying leaves and bark of many forest trees, especially oaks. When it rains, these tannins are washed into the soil and streams, turning the water a deep, dark tea colour. This high tannin water is highly acidic. This acidic water is the reason that some small forest streams and ponds look like they are filled with dark coffee. The tannins, which are the same chemical used to preserve leather, slowly sterilise the water, often preventing the growth of typical bacteria and keeping the water sterile but dark and slightly unsettling. The forest is constantly cleaning itself with its own natural dark chemical process. It is a slow, quiet distillation of the surrounding decay, filling the water with the bitter, permanent memory of the leaves and wood that have died. The dark water is a reminder of the forest's ancient internal chemical system. The hidden cemetery. Throughout history, when smallpox, flu, or other pandemics struck isolated communities near forests, people often buried the dead in simple, unmarked graves in the woods rather than official cemeteries. These emergency graves were meant to be forgotten and left undisturbed. Over the centuries, the forest has completely reclaimed these forgotten plots. The trees and roots have grown around. The earth and the markers, if any existed, have rotted or fallen away. There is no trace left on the surface, but the history remains in the soil. Finding one of these areas is nearly impossible without advanced technology, but the fact remains that in many old forests, you're constantly walking over the forgotten, unmarked resting places of an entire community that vanished silently in the night. The forest is their quiet, massive, permanent tombstone. The Midpoint Whisper. We are halfway through our descent into the quiet heart of the forest, and your mind is growing heavy with the weight of the wood's ancient secrets. This is the perfect moment to allow the silence to fully take hold. If you found a moment of quiet peace with us tonight, please consider joining our quiet community. A soft touch on the subscribe button is a quiet signal to the forest that you want to hear more of its unseen history. Your support allows us to continue bringing these forgotten stories into the silent night, ensuring that the mysteries of the forest are never truly lost to time. Just a small click to join our quiet world. If you have a friend who finds peace in the deep quiet and the slow reveal of history, share this silent journey with them. Let them also find rest in the permanent, patient memory of the trees. We will now continue our walk into the deepest, darkest, most mysterious part of the woods, where the human fear meets the oldest myths. The wrong turn. In many forests, especially those with dense, uniform trees like pine plantations, it is incredibly easy to walk in a circle. People who get lost often end up walking back to the exact spot they started from, completely unaware that they have been travelling in a wide loop for hours. This phenomenon is often blamed on people having one leg slightly stronger than the other, causing them to unconsciously drift toward one side. However, the forest itself plays a part, with the constant, unchanging view and the lack of distant landmarks removing all sense of stable direction. This means that the forest doesn't need to try very hard to lose you. It just has to exist. The woods simply remove your anchor points, and your own body's minor imperfections are enough to guide you back into the exact, silent spot you were trying to escape from. A psychological trap built into the environment itself. The sudden silence. When a large animal, like a deer or bear, is moving through the woods, smaller creatures, the birds, squirrels, and insects, will suddenly and completely stop making noise. This creates a moment of terrifying, complete silence that signals a predator is near and actively moving. The unsettling part is that the human ear often cannot hear the predator itself. We only hear the absence of sound. This sudden drop in the background noise is the forest's final silent alarm, a moment where everything stops to listen and wait for the danger to pass or to strike. If you are walking in the woods and the normal sounds of insects and birds suddenly vanish, you are sharing a moment of deep collective fear with all the hidden creatures around you. It is a moment of pure focus on an invisible danger, a sudden, cold confirmation that something large and lethal is close by. the abandoned toys. In deep forest areas near old highways or former settlements, people sometimes find isolated, forgotten objects, a child's doll, a wooden car, or a small worn teddy bear, often resting right at the base of a tree. The objects are usually too old to be recent and too far away to have been simply dropped. These objects are a quiet, unsettling mystery. They suggest a moment of human panic or sudden vanishing, where a child was briefly held or played before something happened. The toys sit there patiently, slowly decaying, looking like a quiet memorial to a forgotten past. The forest has accepted these small human things into its world, covering them with moss and turning them into silent, tiny monuments. They represent a lost moment of innocence, a child's quiet presence that has been swallowed by the dark, patient earth, and now only the toy remains to tell the smallest part of the story. The cluster of stones. Sometimes, deep in the woods, you come across a small, unsettling cluster of large stones that have been clearly placed in an intentional pattern. A circle, a spiral, or a small cairn. These stones were not placed by nature. They were arranged by human hands for a purpose that is now lost. These arrangements could be anything from ancient boundary markers and religious shrines to simple trail signs left by long-lost travellers. Because they are heavy and permanent, the forest grows around them, but the pattern itself remains, a quiet, geometric scar on the natural chaos of the woods. The presence of these patterned stones is unsettling because it confirms that someone stood in this exact spot with a very specific, serious intention. The stones hold the silent energy of that ancient purpose, forcing you to wonder what secret ritual or necessary message was meant to be conveyed by their quiet arrangement. The cabin in the clearing. In many remote forests there are small, isolated cabins or shacks, often built decades ago by hermits or trappers, that are now completely abandoned. They stand in tiny, unnatural clearings, silent and decaying, with the forest slowly creeping back in to swallow the rough wooden walls. These cabins are a testament to human isolation, a place where a person chose to leave the world entirely and live in the deep quiet. Everything inside, the rusted stove, the rotting mattress, the single empty chair, holds the silent memory of that person's final, lonely existence. The unsettling part is imagining the person who chose to live there and why they eventually left, or perhaps didn't leave at all. The forest is patient, and the cabin is a temporary interruption. Soon, the walls will collapse, the roof will vanish, and the clearing will be silently absorbed back into the continuous green. The body's silent defense. When a human body is exposed to the elements in the deep forest, it does not always simply decompose. In some cold, dry, or boggy environments, the body can undergo a process called saponification, where the fat tissue slowly turns into a soap-like substance known as adiposa. Adipocere is a waxy white or grey substance that can temporarily preserve the features of the body, creating a natural, quiet form of mummification. It is the body's own final defense against complete decay, a terrifying, unintentional preservation in the quiet darkness of the soil. This means that in certain cold or waterlogged patches of the deep woods, the remnants of a person can be preserved for decades in this unsettling, soap-like casing. The forest creates these quiet, temporary monuments to the dead, holding on to the shape of the body long after the person has vanished from all memory. The unnatural quiet. Sometimes getting lost in the forest is not caused by a lack of visibility, but by the overabundance of a single, dominant sound, such as a waterfall or a powerful wind that creates white noise. This constant, overwhelming sound can drown out all other directional cues. The noise acts like a psychological fog, preventing the listener from hearing the small, specific sounds needed to navigate, like the snap of a twig or the distant sound of a road. Your mind becomes so focused on the overpowering repetitive noise that it filters out all other information, leaving you directionless. This means that the forest can confuse you not just by being quiet, but by being too loud in one specific way. The constant repetitive sound is a form of silent disorientation, forcing you to rely only on your eyes, which in the dense green are often the least reliable tools you have for finding your way back to safety. The final marker. In the event of a crash or a natural disaster in a remote forest, the final remnants of the human presence are often the hardest materials, pieces of plastic, metal, and synthetic fibres that the forest cannot easily digest. These bright, unnatural colours become the final, permanent markers. A tiny piece of red plastic from a backpack or a small section of a fiberglass boat can remain intact for hundreds of years, lying beneath a thin layer of leaves. The forest slowly breaks down everything else, but these materials are a persistent, colourful scar, a tiny piece of modern human history that refuses to vanish. This means that long after the rest of a tragic event is forgotten, the forest will still quietly hold on to the smallest, most colourful pieces of synthetic material. They are the forest's final, silent acknowledgement that something from the outside world came here and was unable to be completely absorbed by the ancient earth. The missing person's paradox. When a person goes missing in the woods, search teams often find the victim surprisingly close to a road or a familiar path, even though they were missing for days. They often walk past the search parties, sometimes within a few hundred yards of safety, but they never see the rescue. This is due to the psychological phenomenon of terminal burrowing or hiding behaviour, a disorientation that causes people to seek small, dark and sheltered spaces, often ignoring the signs of rescue. They may take off their clothes or enter a state of deep, quiet confusion. The forest is a perfect environment for this final, confusing quiet. It offers endless, small, dark spaces, a deep thicket, a fallen log, or a shallow cave that provide a final, silent, protective hiding place. The woods become a kind of quiet maze, where the final, fatal turn is always the one closest to safety. The mimic bird. The forest is home to many birds that are excellent mimics, but the most unsettling is the lyrebird of Australia. This bird can perfectly reproduce the sounds of the environment, not just other birds, but human-made noises like car alarms, chainsaws, dog barking, and even camera shutters. The unsettling part is imagining the lyrebird reproducing these sounds deep in a remote, quiet wilderness, creating the illusion of a human presence where there is none. A person lost in the deep woods might hear the quiet sound of a distant chainsaw or a car horn, only to find the sound comes from a silent bird on a branch. This means the lyrebird is carrying the silent memory of the human world deep into the ancient forest. It is a biological echo, constantly replaying the chaotic, noisy sounds of our lives in the deepest quiet, turning the bird song into a confusing, unsettling signal of false hope or forgotten activity. The falling voice. When sounds travel through a dense forest, they are constantly reflected, absorbed, and distorted by the uneven surfaces of the leaves, branches, and trees. This causes the sound to fall into the canopy, making the source of a sound difficult to pinpoint. A sound made even 100 feet away can seem to come from right behind you or right above your head. This auditory illusion is a natural process, but it is deeply unsettling, making every slight sound in the dark seem close, sudden, and impossible to locate. This distortion makes the quiet whispers of the forest feel personal and immediate. It means that the sound of a voice, a snapping twig, or a soft footstep is never where you think it is, creating a quiet, permanent feeling of disorientation and the unnerving sense of being surrounded by unseen things. The whispering tree sap. In some parts of the world, during extremely hot weather, the sap in certain trees can begin to ferment slightly, creating a tiny amount of alcohol and gas inside the tree's bark. This gas then slowly escapes through small cracks and holes in the wood. As the gas escapes, It creates a faint, high-pitched whistling or whispering sound that is nearly impossible to trace. The sound seems to be coming directly from the tree itself, a soft, unsettling hiss that suggests the tree is struggling, or perhaps trying to communicate in its own simple way. This means that the quiet, natural process of fermentation can turn a massive tree into a biological speaker, emitting a soft, unsettling sound into the quiet air. The forest is never truly silent. Sometimes the deepest sounds come from the internal chemistry of the silent standing wood itself. The stone-cold sleep forest animals that hibernate, like bears and squirrels, enter a state of deep, cold sleep that is physiologically unsettling. Their heart rate drops to almost nothing, their breathing is barely perceptible, and their body temperature falls so low they feel cold and stiff to the touch. In this state of quiet suspension, they are technically still alive, but they are completely removed from the world, existing in a silent, slow-motion dream for months at a time. It is a biological act of vanishing, a temporary exchange of warm life for cold, quiet stillness in the deepest dark of a den. The forest is full of these hidden, quiet sleepers, animals that have chosen to simply stop their active life for the entire season. They are quiet, cold bodies waiting for the world to change, reminding us that the deep quiet of the forest is often just a temporary patient suspension of activity. The voice echo. In deep mountain forests, the acoustics of the canyons and steep rock faces can cause a single human voice to echo back in strange, distorted ways. The echo is not always a perfect repetition, but can sound like a faint mocking whisper or a distant, unintelligible cry. The sound waves bounce off the uneven, cold rock, causing the voice to break apart and return as something unsettling and barely recognizable. A simple shout for help might return as a faint, mournful groan, suggesting that the forest itself is repeating your distress in a strange, distorted way. This means that in certain parts of the quiet wilderness, the forest can manipulate your own sound and send it back to you as something creepy and unsettling. The deep, hard silence of the rocks and trees is using your own voice to create the illusion of an unseen, mocking presence. The invisible barrier. The deepest parts of the rainforest are often protected by a layer of air that has such high humidity that it creates a kind of invisible, dense barrier. This barrier affects the temperature, the movement of moisture, and even the way light scatters in the deep woods. This intense humidity traps scents and heat close to the ground, making the world seem thick, still, and heavy. It also creates a permanent layer of moisture on all surfaces, promoting the growth of certain molds and fungi that thrive only in this hot, wet, quiet darkness. This means that the forest is actively creating a physical layer that separates its deep interior from the outside world. This thick, silent, invisible wall of moisture ensures that the most unsettling processes of decay and unseen life remain forever sealed away in the humid, dark core of the woods, the tree that cries. In some environments, when the weather turns suddenly cold after a warm period, the pressure inside certain tree trunks drops rapidly. This change in internal pressure can cause the trunk to make a loud, sudden, sharp, cracking sound, similar to a gunshot or a tree splitting. This sound is often the result of the tree struggling to manage its internal pressure, and the sound is extremely unsettling because it breaks the deep silence of a cold night with a sudden, violent noise. It is the sound of the tree's own internal stress, an unintentional cry of pain in the dark. This means that the woods can sometimes be full of these unsettling, cracking sounds, suggesting damage or breakage where there is none. The great, standing, silent giants of the forest are not always quiet. Sometimes the cold forces them to make a sudden, terrifying noise that echoes across the frozen landscape, the faint footstep. The human mind is exceptionally good at trying to make sense of random, indistinct noise. When a person is alone in a deeply quiet forest, The sound of leaves shifting in the breeze, a branch creaking, or a drop of water falling often registers in the brain as a faint, distant human footstep. This misinterpretation is often called auditory pareidolia. Our brain automatically assigns a human, recognizable cause to a random sound as a survival mechanism. This is why being alone in the deep quiet often leads to the constant, unnerving feeling that someone or something is just behind you, quietly following your path. This means the silence of the forest is not always your friend. The quiet allows your own mind to create the illusion of an unseen follower, filling the empty space with a constant, repetitive, and deeply unsettling sound of an unseen presence. The forest is quiet, but your mind is making its own terrifying noise. The light that blinds. Bioluminescence, the ability of living organisms to create their own light, is common in the deep forest. Certain fungi called foxfire emit a soft, pale greenish glow from decaying wood, often found on the forest floor, illuminating the roots and logs in a strange, unsettling way. This cold, strange light is an internal chemical process of the fungus, not a reflection of the moon or stars. The light has no heat, and it is a subtle, unnatural glow in the deepest dark. It can make the quiet patches of the forest look like they are faintly haunted by a soft, cold green fire. The purpose of the glow is thought to be a way to attract insects that help spread the spores, but the effect is deeply mysterious. The forest is full of these small, quiet, unexplained lights, reminding us that even the decay machine has its own internal illumination, shining quietly in the deepest night. The scent of panic. When certain small prey animals, like mice or voles, are suddenly terrified by a predator, they release a specific, powerful chemical into the air known as an alarm pheromone. This chemical smells like strong, sour fear to other prey animals in the area. This sudden, powerful scent is a silent warning to others that a predator is immediately present and actively hunting. It is a moment of pure, raw chemical panic that drifts on the air currents, telling every small, hidden creature to freeze and hide immediately from the unseen danger. The human nose cannot usually detect this specific chemical, but the entire small animal population of the forest suddenly knows that a hunt has begun. This means the forest can be filled with silent, invisible panic around you, a wave of pure, concentrated fear that you cannot smell but every other small creature can. The boundary trees. For thousands of years, ancient communities used large, distinct trees as natural boundary markers for tribal lands, sacred groves, or hunting territory. These trees were often carved with symbols, or their branches were intentionally twisted or bent when they were young to create an unnatural, recognizable shape. These marker trees, known as bound trees or survey trees, still exist in many old forests, standing as silent living monuments to boundaries that have not existed for centuries. The unnatural shape or the half-healed carvings are a permanent, quiet record of ancient political law and property lines. The forest has grown around the carvings and the bends, but the original intent remains etched in the wood. Finding one of these silent living markers is a chilling reminder that you are standing on land that was once violently claimed and legally protected by a people who are now completely gone. The Forbidden Grove. In many cultures, certain deep patches of forest were considered sacred or forbidden, often surrounding ancient burial sites or ritual grounds. No one was allowed to cut the trees or disturb the ground in these areas, establishing an ancient, unspoken law of the woods. Because of this ancient protection, these small sacred patches often contain the oldest, largest trees in the entire forest, towering over the surrounding younger growth. They look like islands of permanent dark antiquity, a place where time and decay seem to move slower than everywhere else. When you walk into one of these ancient, untouched groves, the air feels different, thicker, colder, and heavier, with the silent weight of centuries of respect. it is an unsettling confirmation that the deepest quiet of the forest is often defined by rules of respect and fear that were established by a forgotten people. The Well of Offerings. In Celtic and early Germanic folklore, deep forest wells and springs were often considered wishing wells or clootie wells, places where travellers and supplicants would leave offerings to the spirits of the woods, usually in the form of old coins, small trinkets, or pieces of cloth. These objects were pushed deep into the water or tied to the branches of the trees surrounding the spring. The cloth would slowly decay and disappear, but the coins and metal objects remain, sinking into the deep, cold mud at the bottom of the well, forming a quiet, unintentional treasure hoard. Finding one of these ancient offering wells is unsettling, because the water holds the silent, collective wishes and fears of people who lived centuries ago. The dark, cold water is a silent, enduring archive of human hope and desperation, sitting quietly in the deepest part of the forest. The ritual scar. In certain forests, especially in the American Northeast, large boulders or flat stones were used by Native American tribes for grinding nuts, grains, or ceremonial dyes. These rocks now bear silent, unnaturally smooth depressions and holes from centuries of repetitive, purposeful use. These scars are not natural erosion. They are the quiet, physical record of human labour and ritual, etched permanently into the stone. The rocks sit in the same spot, holding the shape of the ancient work that was performed there, long after the hands and the tribe have moved on or vanished entirely. Finding one of these scarred stones is like touching the physical presence of an ancient, quiet ceremony. The stone is a silent witness to a history that happened before written record, a permanent reminder that the woods are full of quiet, ritualistic activity that has been absorbed and remembered by the deepest earth. The stone circle's shadow. Across northern Europe, thousands of stone circles and ancient megaliths were built by early peoples, often positioned in remote forest clearings. These massive, heavy stones were arranged to align with the sun and stars, marking quiet, important moments in the ancient calendar. Today, many of these stones are leaning, partially buried, and covered in thick moss and lichen. The forest grows around them, but the pattern itself remains, an enduring quiet geometry in the natural chaos. The original purpose, the quiet marking of celestial events, is now forgotten. Finding one of these circles is unsettling because the stones are heavy with a silent, permanent purpose that we can no longer understand. They are a monument to the scientific and spiritual knowledge of a vanished people, standing quietly in the woods, casting long, dark, intentional shadows on the silent earth. The path that vanished. Many ancient human travel routes, called drove roads or hollow ways, were once used for centuries to move livestock or people through the woods. The constant foot traffic over thousands of years wore deep, permanent depressions into the soil, creating channels that are now overgrown and look like natural ditches. These old worn paths are silent, deep scars on the landscape. They're a quiet, physical record of continuous human movement, a ghost of an ancient journey that has been completely absorbed back into the forest floor. They remain permanently visible to the trained eye, running like veins beneath the surface. Walking down one of these forgotten holloways is unsettling, because you are walking on a path that was worn deep by the feet of thousands of people who lived and vanished centuries ago. It is a quiet, permanent connection to a time when the woods were the only road, and the silence was the only guide. The human bones in the roots. When human remains are left in the forest for a long period, the largest tree roots will often grow directly into and around the skeleton, sometimes incorporating the bones themselves into the tree's living body. The roots seek the nutrients held within the final decaying matter. The roots grow slowly through the skull, the ribs, and the pelvis, using the calcium and other minerals to help the tree grow stronger. It is a quiet, natural act of recycling, turning the final remnants of a human life into the raw material for a massive living tree. This means that a massive, silent tree can sometimes be a final living tombstone, holding the silent remains of a person deep within its roots. The tree is a quiet monument to a forgotten death, standing tall and strong because of the nutrients it found in the deepest, darkest soil. The whisper of the cave. Many deep forests contain hidden limestone caves that were used by ancient peoples as shelters, burial sites, or places for quiet ritual. These caves are often impossible to see from the outside, hidden behind thick growth and rocky overhangs. The air inside these deep caves is unnaturally still, often the same temperature year-round, and the complete heavy silence is broken only by the quiet, slow drip of water. The floor of the cave often holds ancient artifacts, tools, and the remnants of long-forgotten fires. Entering one of these quiet, dark places is like stepping into a direct, cold line to the past. The cave is a permanent, silent archive, holding the cold memory of human fear and shelter. The deep quiet of the stone is a constant, enduring reminder of the earliest days of human presence in the forest. The dark offering. In some parts of the world, ancient ceremonies involved sacrificing precious objects, animals, or even humans by sinking them into the deep, dark, acidic water of forest bogs and peat swamps. The unique chemistry of the peat perfectly preserves organic matter for thousands of years. The cold, oxygen-free water and the high acidity prevent the typical processes of decay, meaning that objects and bodies placed there are perfectly preserved, sometimes down to the clothes and the expression on their face. The bog is a perfect, patient, permanent archive. Finding one of these preserved objects, or bog bodies, is a terrifying, quiet confrontation with an ancient ritual. The dark, silent water holds the final, perfect moment of an ancient, terrible sacrifice. The forest quiet chemistry turned the watery grave into a time capsule. The place of no growth, sometimes, a patch of forest floor is completely barren, without any moss, leaves, or undergrowth, even though the surrounding area is lush and full of life. This unsettling feature often suggests a deep chemical change in the soil, sometimes caused by long-ago spills or ancient, ritualistic burns. These patches are often slightly sunken or irregularly shaped, looking like a quiet, permanent scar on the Earth's surface where life refuses to take hold. The soil is usually dark, hard, and completely silent, a patch of natural emptiness in the middle of continuous growth. The existence of a spot where the life-giving forest cannot grow is a quiet mystery. It is a place of permanent, silent refusal, a zone where the forest has marked its own boundaries of history and chemistry, deciding that this one piece of ground must remain forever silent and empty. The Silent Watcher. In many cultures, the oldest, largest trees were believed to be literal guardians of the woods, holding the spirits of the ancestors or the power of a specific place. These trees were never to be cut down, for fear of releasing the spirit and angering the forest itself. The belief holds that these trees are not just wood and leaves. They are silent, conscious observers, watching the quiet cycle of the forest and judging the intentions of anyone who passes beneath their great canopy. They are the oldest living judges of the woods. When you stand next to a truly ancient, massive tree, its age is palpable, carrying the silent weight of centuries of observation. This cultural belief turns a simple piece of nature into a quiet, judgmental entity, reminding you that the feeling of being watched in the woods is an instinct thousands of years old. The footprint that isn't there. The folklore of large hidden creatures, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or the Yeti, is found in forests across the entire globe, suggesting a universal human need to believe in a silent, massive guardian that lives just outside the edge of human knowledge. The creatures are always described as being incredibly strong, mostly harmless unless provoked, and masters of silence and camouflage. They are the perfect embodiment of the forest's immense unseen power, a creature that is too fast to be seen and too quiet to be heard. The belief in these creatures is a psychological acknowledgement that the forest is still large enough and deep enough to hide something massive, quiet, and ancient. The fear is not that it will attack you, but that it will simply watch you from the shadows, knowing you are there while you never know it exists. The siren of the canopy. In German and Slavic folklore, forest spirits known as the woodwives or leshi are said to use soft, unsettling calls that mimic the sounds of lost children or a distressed animal to lure travellers deep into the woods until they are hopelessly lost. The spirits are often portrayed as being made of leaves and moss, masters of mimicry who use the human instinct to help a distressed person against them. Once the victim is deep enough, the spirit vanishes and the traveller is left alone with the terrifying absolute silence. This legend speaks to the human fear of being tricked by the deep, deceptive quiet of the woods. It reminds us that the most dangerous thing in the forest is often a sound you trust, a quiet, simple noise that is leading you away from safety into the permanent, silent confusion of the deep shadows. The will-o'-the-wisp folklore from many cultures tells of strange, flickering, cold lights seen deep in the forest and swamps at night. These lights, called will-o'-the-wisps, are said to be the lights of evil spirits trying to lure travellers off the path and into the deep mud or bogs. The scientific explanation is often the ignition of swamp gas, methane or phosphine, that is released from the natural decay of organic matter in the bog. The gas ignites naturally, creating a cold, blue or green flickering fire that seems to move just ahead of the viewer. The creepy fact remains that the silent natural process of decay can create a real, flickering, ghostly light that actively moves in the dark. The forest's chemical process is perfectly imitating a quiet, malevolent spirit, using the simple power of decomposition to create a beautiful, dangerous illusion. The permanent maze. In many stories, the forest itself is conscious and can change its own paths, making the way forward impossible to follow. The trees move when you look away, and the landmarks change their positions, trapping the victim in a permanent, silent living maze. The psychological truth behind this is that the forest's vast, repetitive nature, the endless similarity of the tree trunks, the leaves and the shadows, makes the human mind unable to process the small, subtle differences that are necessary for navigation. The woods don't need to physically move, they simply need to be large and quiet enough to overwhelm your sense of direction. The myth is a quiet acknowledgement of the forest's massive scale, its ability to psychologically crush the human sense of place with endless, silent, terrifying repetition. The cursed object. In many myths, the deep forest is where ancient cursed objects are taken to be quietly hidden away from the world. A haunted sword, a dangerous doll, or a mirror that shows a terrible future. The forest is seen as the final, safest place to bury something that is too dangerous to destroy. The forest's quiet decay, its deep soil, and its sheer isolation are used to contain the curse, ensuring that the object is not disturbed for hundreds or thousands of years. The woods become a massive, silent, living vault for the world's unwanted, terrifying treasures. Finding one of these objects is not just a discovery, it is the silent, quiet interruption of an ancient, necessary quarantine. The moss-covered tree roots are merely the security system, holding the dangerous item in a deep, dark sleep, waiting patiently for the moment it can finally be forgotten. The quiet siren. The sound of a mountain lion or cougar's scream is often described as sounding exactly like a woman's terrified cry. This unsettling sound has contributed to hundreds of ghost stories and myths about dangerous spirits in the woods that try to lure people to their aid. The cat's vocal cords are perfectly adapted to mimic this high-pitched, desperate sound, which serves to intimidate rival predators or attract a mate. The animal is simply communicating, but the effect is deeply unnerving to the human ear, especially in the dead quiet of the night. When you hear this quiet, chilling sound in the dark, your mind is instantly presented with two choices: a human tragedy or an ancient, powerful predator. The forest is using the quiet, natural sound of a hunting animal to perfectly create the illusion of a human ghost. The forest of statues. In many folk tales, travellers who wander off the path in the deep woods are turned into stone or wood, becoming silent, permanent parts of the landscape. They stand forever on the side of the path, watching the quiet world move around their cold, unmoving body. This myth speaks to the human fear of losing all agency, of becoming a permanent, silent prisoner of the woods. It is the fear of being so perfectly still and silent that the forest simply accepts you as another tree or another stone that has always been there. The silent, quiet forest is constantly turning living things into still, permanent objects through decay and consumption. The myth is a frightening personification of this natural process, reminding us that the deep woods are full of quiet, unmoving figures who have surrendered to the patient will of the trees. The unblinking eye. In the folklore of many First Nations in North America, there is the belief in a creature known as the Wendigo, a silent, immense, gaunt spirit of the deep, hungry woods that is never full. The creature is associated with the cold, isolation, and starvation. The Wendigo is said to be the quiet embodiment of human greed and the fear of the winter dark. It moves with a silent, unnatural speed and is often only heard as a deep, low, rumbling groan or a sudden, unexplained snap of a large branch in the distance. The fear of the Wendigo is the quiet fear of the forest's immense indifference and the hunger that is always present in the deepest dark. It is a terrifying, silent symbol of the quiet truth. The woods are always hungry, and the deep quiet is only waiting for the moment of total isolation to take hold. The perpetual twilight. In the deepest parts of the forest, the canopy is so thick that it blocks nearly 99% of the sunlight, creating a zone of perpetual twilight on the forest floor even at noon. This permanent dark gloom is the natural state of the deep woods. The plants that live on the forest floor in this deep quiet are specially adapted to survive on this tiny fraction of light, and they are usually dark green, low-growing, and slow to move. The entire ecosystem under the canopy exists in a state of continuous subdued light. This means that the forest actively works to create a permanent silent darkness for its most secretive inhabitants. The canopy is a massive living roof that ensures the quiet processes of decay and the deepest quiet of the ecosystem remains shielded forever from the disruptive light of the sun. The human magnet. People who become deeply lost in the woods often begin to hallucinate and lose their sense of reality. They may see faint lights, hear voices, or perceive shapes moving in the shadows. The intense isolation and the lack of external sensory input cause the brain to create its own internal world of activity. The forest is so uniformly quiet that it acts like a sensory deprivation tank, slowly removing the usual anchors of sight and sound. When the brain is starved of reliable input, it begins to create its own, filling the dark quiet with familiar but terrifying illusions of companionship or pursuit. This means that the deepest secret of the forest is that it doesn't need monsters to scare you. It only needs quiet. The quiet causes your own mind to create the monsters, forcing you to face the terrifying truth that the most frightening things in the woods are the things that live inside your own head. The whispering water. When water runs over smooth, flat stones in a shallow forest stream, the natural turbulence of the flow can sometimes create a soft, continuous, low-frequency sound that, when listened to for a long time, can resemble a quiet, unintelligible human whisper. The sound is not an actual voice, but the constant, complex friction of the water and the stone. Your mind, desperate for a narrative, tries to find words in the sound, turning the quiet movement of nature into the illusion of a soft, constant, secret communication. The stream is running and speaking its own silent language of erosion and flow, but the human ear is interpreting it as a secret conversation. The forest is full of these quiet, natural illusions, constantly tempting the human mind to find meaning in the permanent chaos of the natural world. The forgotten path. When a forest trail is completely abandoned for only a few years, the roots, leaves, and decay machine begin to erase it immediately. The trail vanishes, and the earth looks completely untouched, even though thousands of people once walked that exact spot. The forest is incredibly efficient at forgetting and erasing the human presence. It slowly, patiently covers the compacted soil and uses the constant decay of leaves and branches to remove the final evidence of the path, ensuring that the natural chaos is quickly restored. This means that the quiet forest is constantly working to deceive us, to make us believe that the land has always been wild and untouched. The memory of the path is held only by the very oldest trees, who are waiting silently for the last of the human footprint to disappear completely. The cold spot. Sometimes, in a specific part of the forest, the air will suddenly feel 5 to 10 degrees colder than the surrounding area, without any logical explanation. This unsettling cold spot often moves or vanishes quickly, leaving a strange, quiet chill in the atmosphere. The scientific explanation is often the quiet pooling of heavy, cold air in a small depression, or a small pocket of ground where natural evaporation is occurring rapidly, drawing heat from the air. It is a simple, natural phenomenon, but the feeling is deeply unsettling. The feeling of a sudden, quiet chill is a perfect example of the forest using its own natural physics to create the illusion of an unseen presence. The cold spot is an invisible, silent guest that suddenly appears in the dark, reminding you that the woods control the temperature and the air around you. The stare of the water. When you look into a deep, still pool of dark water in the forest, the surface often reflects the trees and the sky perfectly, making it seem like you're looking down into another, inverted world. This perfect, silent reflection is a form of natural optical deception. The surface of the still water is acting like a mirror, but the water itself is dark and deep, suggesting an impossible depth. The illusion is so complete that it often feels like the water is silently watching you with a single, dark, reflective eye that holds the inverted world within it. The stillness of the water creates a moment of pure, silent, psychological focus. It is the forest using its own simple physics to create the unsettling sense of a single, unblinking eye watching from the ground, holding the sky and the trees in its cold, dark reflection. The unseen trail. Many forest animals use the same invisible trails for centuries, creating paths that are imperceptible to human eyes but are well known to every creature in the woods. These trails are not worn into the ground but are marked by faint scent, broken twigs, and chemical signals left by passing animals. The animals move silently along these invisible highways, ensuring the most efficient and quiet passage between feeding and resting areas. These paths often follow the exact same topography as the human roads nearby, suggesting an ancient, natural logic to the movement of life in the woods. This means that the forest is crisscrossed with thousands of silent, hidden trails, all active in the deep quiet of the night. You're constantly walking over the busy, invisible highways of the wild, completely unaware of the precise, silent movement happening all around your feet. The final echo. In old, isolated forests, when a loud, violent sound, like a gunshot or a tree falling, occurs, the sound waves can travel for miles, bouncing off distant hills and valleys, creating a delayed, quiet, and unsettling final echo hours later. The sound is often a faint, barely audible repetition of the original noise, so quiet that it is nearly impossible to tell if it was real or simply imagined. It is a slow, quiet, final return of the energy of the violence, long after the original event is forgotten. This final echo is the forest's slow, patient way of processing the loud trauma of the outside world, holding on to the sound and then quietly releasing it in the deep silence. The woods are an immense, patient acoustic memory, slowly giving back the noise it once absorbed. The tree that sleeps. All trees follow a circadian rhythm or a daily sleep cycle, just like humans and animals. As the sun sets, the branches of many tree species slowly begin to droop or sink downward, entering a state of quiet rest that is barely visible to the human eye. The branches slowly lift back up as the sun rises, completing their silent, slow, unconscious journey through the day and night. This movement is a slow, quiet breathing of the massive organisms around us, a perpetual cycle of life and gentle, quiet rest. This means that the entire forest around you is quietly, slowly falling asleep with you. The great silent giants are lowering their massive limbs and entering their own slow, dark dream. The quiet of the woods is simply the sound of a million enormous beings entering their natural state of rest. The cold, heavy air. The deepest sensation of fear in the forest is often described as a sudden, physical feeling of intense, crushing cold and heavy pressure on the chest, even when the air temperature is normal. This is the body's natural, ancient physical response to the deep quiet and the dark. The absence of light and the sudden, complete quiet cause the brain to revert to an ancient, primal state of alert, interpreting the sensory void as immediate unseen danger. The feeling of the heavy air is the psychological weight of the isolation pressing down on your senses. The forest's quiet power is its ability to use isolation and darkness to create a deep, physical feeling of fear that has nothing to do with any actual monster or threat. The cold, heavy air is the silent psychological acknowledgement that you're alone with the massive, indifferent power of nature. The 100th fact. The final quiet truth is that the forest is the perfect keeper of secrets because it is not actively malicious, it is simply indifferent. The trees do not judge, they do not care, and they do not remember you as a person, but as a temporary fragile piece of chemistry that will eventually return to the earth. The entire cycle of the woods, the decay, the growth, the quiet sounds, and the absolute darkness, is simply waiting for you to complete your own short journey. The forest is patient because it knows it will always win. It will absorb your footsteps, your voice, and your final breath into its permanent, quiet memory. The forest is waiting for you to sleep, and it is holding your darkest secrets in its silent, deep embrace. Now that you have heard all the facts, your mind is quiet and the world is still. Rest now, surrounded by the patient silence of the trees, and let the quiet darkness finally take you into a deep, dreamless sleep. The final rest. The air is still, and the secrets are all revealed. You're now safely surrounded by the woods, and nothing can harm you now that you know the depth of its history. Let the sounds of the night, the distant wind, the soft rustle of leaves, and the deep silence of the earth wash over you like a dark, warm blanket. You're a small part of a massive, quiet, patient world, and you're completely safe in its slow, powerful embrace. Let your body relax completely into the quiet, and let your mind drift away from the facts and into the comfortable, soft darkness. Thank you for walking the forest path with us tonight. Sleep now.